Hello, welcome to the afternoon session of the Research Culture Week and the last speaker of the day. So as I mentioned this morning, improving research culture is very important given that a poor research culture has serious implications. For example, it can slow progress towards open science, it can discourage interdisciplinarity, and it can inhibit the flow of research between academia, government, and industry, affecting the ability to recruit the best researchers and to support an innovative and creative research environment. We have an exciting talk coming now by Dr. Kate Hext. Kate is the Head of Humanities and Senior Lecturer in English at the University of Exeter. Her talk is entitled Reach for the Sky, Thinking Globally on a Budget, Plotting Your Career in a Pandemic. Without further ado, welcome Kate to the Research Culture Week.
Hi there, and thank you very much for this invitation. Now I'm going to share my screen and hopefully you'll then all be able to see it. Is that okay? Can you see the screen now?
Yes.
Okay, I'll just flick back to the first slide. Right, hi everyone. So I'm going to start with something that happened to me in the second year of my PhD. Now, it was the first time I'd ever been at a large association conference in my field, and there were several hundred people there. I wasn't a funded student, so I supported myself through the first year of my PhD and most of the second year. And I spent £400 on this conference, which was the money that I'd saved from my rather unglamorous part-time job in a shoe shop. I didn't know anyone at the conference, and I delivered a paper there that had taken me 4 weeks full-time to write to an audience of just 8 people, 3 of whom had to be there because they were on the panel and they didn't have any choice. And after the conference dinner that night, I went to the bar, bought a Diet Coke, and looked for people to talk to. I ended up talking to a small group of academics, and the professor in the group at one point turned to me and said, "What are you writing your PhD on?" I said, "Walter Pater." You don't have to know who Walter Pater is. Still looking at me, she said, "Well, how are you going to get a job with a doctorate on Pater?" And now, as I say, you don't have to know who Walter Pater is to get her point. Her point is that my research, my PhD, was, in her academic judgment, too niche to be something that would lead me onto an academic career. And waiting for my bus back to my little cheap B&B that night in the centre of town, I was reminded of an article in a teen magazine called Shout. I don't know if any of you remember Shout. Shout was aimed at 11 to 15-year-olds, and it was mostly about how to get a snog from the boy you fancy at school. But this article that I remembered waiting at the bus stop is something that served me very well. And the article's title was "Don't Get Mad, Get Even More Fabulous." And it's something that I've thought back to since as well. Don't get mad, get even more fabulous. You've got to build up quite a hard skin, so quite a tough skin when you're starting out as a researcher. But why exactly am I telling you this low-level horror story in a talk about research culture and how great research culture is and how to cultivate it? Well, research cultures can sometimes be bad. They can sometimes be hard. They're not safe spaces sometimes. And I'm putting that out there first of all because it's important not to sugarcoat it. But what I realized quite a long time after that happened, probably, to be honest with you, what I realized was that it wasn't my problem, it was her problem. She wasn't being a kind person. She wasn't being a thoughtful person. She wasn't being part of the kind of research culture that I would like to see more of, and that I hope exists more today than it did nearly 15 years ago. when that happened to me. The professor at the conference also didn't appreciate that in being at the conference, putting myself out there, meeting new people beyond my university community, beyond my own small research area of Walter Pater studies. Now, Walter Pater is amazing, but he's quite a small niche field. By doing that, I was already addressing the issue that she thought was my problem. I was meeting new people. I was expanding my horizons, being part of the kind of becoming the kind of scholar that one wants to be post PhD, postdoc. Now, during your PhD period, there's an understandable pressure to focus on your PhD thesis, on the research and writing of the actual document that's going to get you the PhD. But although writing your thesis is your main job, and as a postdoc, you may well feel you need to focus on postdoc applications and prepping, teaching or applying for posts. The fact of the matter is that building a good research network, building an academic community, and being part of a positive research culture will help you to write your thesis. It will help you to write an excellent thesis, and it will help you in your future career because it will help you to develop international support, collaborations, and develop your presentation skills. So if there's one thing that you take from this talk, it's just this, that being part, an active part and a positive part of your research community shouldn't be an additional burden. It should be, and hopefully would be, an energizing experience. And there are a number of ways that you can make research collaborations work for you in the early stages of your career. Thinking about it last week, when I was preparing for this talk, it struck me that the title that I decided to give it is really ambiguous. I wonder whether any of you noticed that too. It's called, of course, Reach for the Sky. And Reach for the Sky is a phrase that was first used in gangster films in the early 1930s, where during a hold-up, a gangster would point a revolver and spit out, "Reach for the sky." And maybe that ambiguity is telling, maybe it was subconscious that I called it that, because being a PGR or an early career researcher can feel quite often like a hold-up situation, I think, in which you're the one with your arms in the air, staring into the abyss, but actually you're more empowered than you think you are sometimes. You can network with leading academics in your field. You can be instrumental in your research area, as well as both making cool things happen, becoming the kind of researcher that you want to be, and bringing other people on in the field. And that's really important too. So what I'd like to suggest to you is that broadening the scope of your work and your research network, and really thinking about how you can collaborate in a really positive research culture, both in your university and beyond it, not just nationally but internationally, is something that will pay dividends for your career and your sense of your sense of yourself in your career and in your field. I've got two headings under which I want to speak today, and those headings map the title that I gave my talk. The first thing I want to talk about is building an international research profile on a budget. And as I said, I wasn't a funded research student at first. It took hard graft, as it does for a lot of people, for me to get some funding, and I had to do everything on a shoestring to make it work. But quite often it's not necessarily the people who get the biggest funding, or get funding first, or the people who get the double-starred first, who at undergraduate level, who are the most successful people at building a successful research culture and profile. It's those kind of people are the people who manage to make their research culture work, are people who are tenacious and kind and modest and open to new ideas most often. How can you build an international research profile? Let's say that you're a beginning academic, or you're an academic who's taken a break, or you're an academic who has not been involved in research culture beyond doing your project. Well, the first advice I'd give you is to go to a conference. Go to a conference. And now, of course, those are more accessible now, and this is one of the very few positive things about COVID, in my view, is that going to a conference is something that is accessible to a lot of people who couldn't travel for family reasons or personal circumstance reasons. But have a look for conferences. Spend some time, a morning, even a day, looking at things that might interest you. Now, going to a conference it certainly doesn't mean going to something in your direct research area. As I said, my own research area when I started out when I was a PhD student was this chap called Walter Pater, who you may know him because he was a great influence on Oscar Wilde. And he thought that we should all live for moments of intense beauty, but that doesn't really matter. He's a small field. So if I wanted to go to conferences about Walter Pater, well, there weren't very many. There was kind of one every 4 years. But going to a conference is a very good excuse to broaden your field of interest. Use going to a conference to meet new people and follow your broader interests. So you could find something in an area that you'd like to go into potentially, or into which you feel your work could fit. If you can't afford the conference fee, feel confident that you can apply for a grant to go. Find out if there is funding. Approach the organizer, or approach your director of postgraduate research or department head for funds, because quite often some money can be found if you've got a really good idea. So never think that because you can't afford something, or because something seems difficult, that it can't be done. Sometimes it's very difficult to ask for help for those for financially. I'm a sort of rule following person, so I used to kind of tend to think, well, let's see if there's any money. Oh, there isn't, so I won't be able to do that. But look for creative ways, and if those ways that I've just suggested don't work, why don't you feel empowered to email the organizer of the conference and ask for a fee waiver in return for doing a conference review for a journal. That's something that that I've done myself, and I've written up the conference in a postgraduate journal. It's also something that I've done for other people when I've organised conferences. So someone who wanted to come along to a large conference I organised in London, who emailed me, and because they emailed me, I thought, oh, that person really wants to come. Not only were they able to come for nothing, but also I remembered their name, and wasn't surprised to see that they came up, and there was someone who's sort of making a name for themselves subsequently. You could also offer to help out at a conference, offer to set up the stall, give out the programs. If we're ever in a post-COVID world where it's possible to do those things again. Moving on to the next thing, I'd suggest that when you go to a conference, or if you go to departmental seminars, ask a good question. Asking a good question is the best way to get yourself noticed. You don't need to know a lot to ask a good question. You don't have to be an expert in the field. If anyone with a general sense of what's going on, if they pay very careful attention to the argument, they can draw out the internal dimensions of it and articulate very carefully a question that will make everyone think a bit more about what's been said. Crucially, have the confidence to do so. Have the confidence to ask a question. It might be going out of your comfort zone, but going out of your comfort zone is something that will help you to become a more confident researcher too, and a more confident person in presenting your ideas. Someone a few years ago now said to me at a conference, "Oh, you always ask a really good question." And I didn't think anyone had ever noticed, but it turns out they do notice, and they mark you they mark your card in a positive way. Being at a conference is also a place where you can see the best and worst of research culture, because you see people who are nervous, potentially sort of on the edge. They're nervous about their own paper, they're nervous about how they're presenting themselves. They're kind of, everyone's out of their comfort zone, and that goes for well-established professors as well. It probably goes for that person who I met in the bar who really kind of upset me by indicating that I wouldn't ever get a job with my PhD. But she was awkward and she was nervous, and although it's taken me a long time to realize that, I realize now that that a lot of people say things that they don't mean at conferences in negative ways. But you also see the best of generosity at conferences. And the way to do that, one of the things that you can really benefit from that is making sure that you make time, if you're at a conference, to and including at an online conference, take time to talk to people who you admire, whose work you admire. Again, have the confidence to do that, because if you're a postgrad, or if you're an early career researcher, or if you just because you don't know the people who are maybe organizing the conference or giving the keynotes, it does not mean that you can't go and have a conversation with them. Don't be shy. Go speak to them. Ask if you can send them a paper. So a number of people have done that to me. Come up to me after I've given a paper and said, "Look, I've read your essay on such and such. I wonder, could I send you a paper I'm working on?" And of course, one almost invariably says yes, because that's a really positive thing to do. And the people who you meet at conferences who you admire are people who've been in your position as well, and they do understand. They do understand what it's like. One thing that I haven't put on here, but I wish that I had, is to do with research culture as well, and particularly pertinent at conferences and seminars. Make sure that you're comfortable. Now, from my point, in my view, good research culture begins with comfort. And I don't mean emotional comfort, because you may well not get that, and you might not get intellectual comfort, but what you can do is you can be comfortable in what you're wearing. This is particularly going out to other females who are in this session. And I hope it doesn't happen anymore. But when I first started going to conferences, in fact, I know it still happens because I've seen it happening. When I first started going to conferences, I know that I used to wear very uncomfortable shoes, heeled shoes, and I wasn't very comfortable. And quite often I wasn't very warm either, because I'd wear a little hardy or a little jackets. And even in the summer, of course, English summers aren't great. So, but I think that good intellectual intervention begins with being comfy. So make sure when you go to a conference, whether that's a physical conference in a place away from home, or whether you're sitting at your laptop, make sure that you're comfortable. if it's cold in your room or your house, make yourself a hot water bottle if you're going to be sitting in front of your laptop. But make sure that you're comfortable, and don't wear really high-heeled, uncomfortable shoes unless you're very dedicated to wearing them. So, research culture. You're at a conference. You're networking with the movers and shakers in your field. You may be giving a paper, in which case make sure that you stick to time, make sure that you practice it, make sure you can pronounce everything that's in the conference paper. You're talking to people. You can also be active. You can offer to chair a session. Again, email the organizer. You can offer to write her up. But make sure, whatever you do, be an active part of that conference, be an active part of the seminar, be someone who people remember, but in a positive way. And this comes back to research culture. When we're nervous, and often, of course, talking about one's research, talking about one's research and ideas and writing can be something that makes one very nervous. It used to make me very nervous. I think it makes everyone nervous. When you're starting out, depending on what sort of person you are, that can bring out, that for some people that brings out sort of defensiveness or anxiety. It can mean that sometimes that can get in the way of being open to new ideas. It means that it can get in the way of being positive about other people's work and asking people about their work. I don't think there's an answer to that. I don't think there's any silver bullet solution. But what I would say is be mindful about your presence in research culture. Make sure that you try to identify the potential pitfalls that you have. For me, I can be kind of defensive. I can be too defensive, which can come over as aggression probably. Or I don't really do it anymore, but when I was a PhD student, probably I would be a bit defensive about my work, but actually realizing that other people are nervous, realizing that actually you have a right to be there. You've earned being there. You've earned your stripes, and you are presenting really interesting and important work. Knowing that should be a kind of liberation for you to be positive about other people, modest about your own work, kind to other people, and also to help other people too. If you see someone who's feeling nervous, who is having a difficult time, or finding the conference situation a bit difficult, sitting with them, checking that they're okay. The first time I met someone who I've collaborated with extensively now, we were sitting at the breakfast of a pretty awful conference, to be honest, and we were having breakfast, a group of us, we're all postgraduates, about 8 of us, and he said he had to leave the table because he felt so sick, because he was so nervous about his paper. I'm not sure that I was very much help to him, but it made me realize how nervous and upset some people can be, even people who put on a very strong act. So I've talked a bit about being active in research culture, and I've talked a bit about being empowered. Now, what I'd like to encourage you to do is to be an academic entrepreneur, to be your own manager, to manage your own academic career thoughtfully in a way that gets you to where you want to go. And this begins with research culture, I think. This begins with thinking about your research, thinking about how it fits into the field, and thinking about your place in relation to other researchers in your field. that begins in your university and in the network that you have right there, but it also means looking beyond your university, your cohort of fellow postgrads or ECRs or colleagues, in order to network nationally and internationally. I would suggest, first of all, write, but write in the right places. Think about think about how quickly you produce work. Think about how you can pitch your work to the best journals, or journals that are going to get you to where you want to go. And sometimes those aren't the best journals, but they're the most appropriate journals for your work. So, as I said, be mindful about where you're writing, what is a good use of your time. It can be the case that someone will approach you, or people will approach you and ask you to write, but there's an opportunity cost in that. Is it worth your time? Is it worth you is it worth you positioning an article or some research that you have spent 6 months completing in a postgrad journal which is open access? Well, postgrad open access journals are fantastic, and a really great place to write. But you might think, well, okay, maybe I could write this other thing for them, and maybe this piece particularly goes somewhere else because it's a better fit. So think about prestige, do think about right fit for what you're working and for what you're working on, and the kind of company that you want to be in. So writing collaboration, being part of a co-authored article is something that you can position yourself for very well by presenting well at conferences, by becoming part of a productive part of research groups. Research culture is about communicating too. This is my next point, and I want to urge you to think not narrowly about research culture, not to think just about research culture in your home institution or even amongst networks of academics, but also how research culture is about communicating. This is really, I think it's really important in a way to say things to a broader interested public. It's also a way that you can show that you're distinctive when it comes to the job markets, showing that you've got something different, that you're interested in talking to people beyond the academy. Journals and magazines like The Conversation have been really good for that, but also slots like Comment is Free in The Guardian and any number of other really good places online mean that you can show off your work and show how your work fits into broader conversations beyond the research academy. As I say, it's also a way to show that you're distinctive when it comes to the job market. Now, I've been on a number of panels now appointing academics, and there are a lot of applicants, but one thing we look for, and it's partly because it's the way the national conversation is going, but one of the things we're looking for is people who are interested in having a broader conversation with the public about their research, people who are interested in communicating their ideas. We definitely look for that, and it's something that has been really important in my work, or increasingly important in my work. I think sometimes it's harder to say something difficult in words that anyone could understand. Someone without a degree or a PhD in your field could understand. It's harder to do that than it is to put it in the terms and in the sort of academies of the field. So think about how you could do that, how you could participate in that broader research culture and conversation. penultimately for this section, Twitter. Now, I'm really old, probably compared to most of you, but I would suggest being very careful about your use of Twitter. Think about how you want to use Twitter. Don't fall into Twitter usage, but think about how Twitter is part of your research profile if you're tweeting under your own name. It's part of your presentation of how you fit into research culture. So what do you want people to see? What do you want people to know about you? Sometimes there's certainly a thread of academic conversation on Twitter, which is quite negative, quite draining about higher education. And I can totally understand that that is a way to participate in a conversation, discussion about the state of higher education and about postgraduate opportunities often as well, and the job market, and in these times, COVID as well, and the universities. But think about what it says about you. Think about whether you'd be happy for potential research collaborators to read your Twitter feed, whether it would be something that you'd think would be a boon to you, would be a positive, or whether it would somehow diminish you as a researcher. So think about that as part of think about Twitter as part of your public profile, and something about you that people will look at and which employers will look at as well as potential research collaborators. And finally, for this section, you can be, as I said, you can be your own agent in the research culture, in your research culture. Look for gaps in what there is. If there isn't a conference or there isn't a research series that is interesting to you or which is in your field, offer one. Think about how to do it. Make things happen. You can be an academic entrepreneur. The way that you develop your research profile can quite often be productively through thinking about what is not being done. And I found that for myself, I quite often think of something and I say, oh, I wish that X was happening. When is someone going to do X? And they don't do it. And eventually I think, oh, I'm going to have to do it because I really want this thing to happen. I organised a conference with a friend. In fact, a friend who felt sick. Who I mentioned before. I organised a conference with this friend 5 years ago on a topic that no one else had ever organised a conference on, and it was about the afterlives of decadence, the decadent movement in literature, in the age of modernism. It was called Decadence in the Age of Modernism, and it was about the afterlives of Oscar Wilde in an age where we tended to think that people didn't think about Oscar Wilde at all. And it turned out that loads and loads of people were also interested in this, and over 100 people came to this conference. So look at what I'm telling you that because sometimes looking for gaps in the offerings and thinking about what you have to offer your research culture, how you can bring people together, and how you can create an inviting and open discussion in your field. Those things will be positive for the field, and they'll also be positive for you and your position in the field too. Giving people in your research area a place to develop their ideas in new ways, with an atmosphere that in which they feel that they can share ideas, in which they feel that they can develop new ideas and develop new collaborations, is something that you can do no matter what your previous research profile is, no matter whether you're just starting out or you've been a professional academic for a couple of decades. People will be grateful to you. People will be glad that you've done the organisation to make something happen. Making something happen takes takes a lot of work, but it's worth it because it pays dividends and it makes other cool things happen. Organizing a conference, organizing a seminar series, it's not just that. It's not just what happens at the conference, or the seminar series, but it's also about what happens afterwards and the collaborations that come out of it. Let's move on. See if I can move this. Oh, hang on. There we go. So I also wanted to talk about plotting your career in a pandemic. Now, as I've said here, we're all in a holding pattern at present. We've all got to make our plans and remake them again. But it's not too early to start being the academic that you want to be. It's not too early to start plotting both your career after the pandemic, but also looking at what you can do during the pandemic too, to foster a really positive research culture. As I've already mentioned, organising things online have a really positive aspect in that they're more inclusive for people who are unable to travel to conferences or be part of reading groups or research networks under normal circumstances. So focusing on those kind of things is a way to make your research community more inclusive and in a really positive way, I think. Now, older academics like me, and even older academics, as many are, often don't think about online first. This is something that you, if you're internet savvy and if you're savvy about using Zoom and Teams, this is something that you have an advantage on. This is something that you can do that other people can't. So it may be a pandemic, it is a pandemic, and it may be awful, but there are ways in which you can turn this into a more positive thing for your research community. I give you an example. I organised in the summer. I was just feeling it was kind of depressing, right? I had to, like I'm sure many of you, if not all of you, I had to cancel 2 research trips. One to New York and one to Los Angeles, and I'd organised everything, and all of my plans were based around doing those trips. So what I thought I'd do, thinking back to that don't get mad, get even more fabulous. So instead of doing that, what I thought I'd do was I thought I'd organise a Zoom seminar series, because I kind of missed seeing the faces of the people in my research groups across the UK and the US. So I thought we'd put together, I thought I would put together, I say we, that's a euphemistic we, just me. I thought I would put together a series of 5 or 6 talks through the autumn term. And so I did put them together. And it's been a really positive thing. It was a lot of organisation, and one of the postgraduates in my department brilliantly responded to my call, and she was really positive and made this fantastic poster to go with the series and helped me publicise it online. And I thought that this, sort of naively really, I kind of thought that this was just about people going to some talks. But actually it turns out that if you put on a series of seminars during a global pandemic, you get lots and lots and lots more people coming. We've had over 100 people come and sign up to each one of the talks. And it's also very poignant. I realised that organising research events that are accessible can end up being something that is very, very meaningful to people. I've had lots of emails from, nearly a dozen emails from people saying that the series has given them something to look forward to in a time where they were feeling very down and things were feeling very, very difficult for them. So being part of a positive research culture isn't just about research. It's not just about career, because our research and our careers and our lives are often very mixed up with each other in positive and negative ways. It's also about looking after people, and fostering a really positive research community is about career. It is about where you want to be in 5 years' time, to anticipate my next point, but it's also about being part of a community of people who look out for each other. And I think that's really important. Some research cultures, but some aspects of research culture can be very competitive. I'm a long distance runner, so I always think about things in running terms. For me, it's a bit like running a marathon. Being a researcher, it's not about competing against other people. It's about your own time, your own PB, your own personal best. It's about competing with yourself. So even if you're a competitive person, I'm a competitive person, I think many of us probably are, don't compete with other people. Look after other people, because we're all very human, all too human, as well as being academic researchers too. Thinking about the career, though, I would suggest that when you're thinking about your research community and your research culture, do think about where, if you're plotting your career and you're sitting plotting your career in a pandemic, grounded due to the fact that there aren't any flights anywhere, we can't go anywhere, use that time to plot where you want to be. Where do you want to be in 5 years' time? Where do you want to be in 10 years' time? You can use your positioning of yourself in different research groups, going to different kind of conferences to position yourself where you want to be. It will determine where you go, where you spend your research money, or where you pitch yourself and which journals you pitch to. But no matter where you want to be in 5 years' time, or 10 years' time, or 20 years' time, go with your energy. Never try to build a career. This is personal advice, you may disagree, but I think that the most successful academic careers are academic careers that use the energy and enthusiasm of the person to fuel fuel writing and work. So I use myself as an example. I began as an academic, as a Victorianist, and I talked about Victorian literature, late Victorian literature. But I kind of realized during the course of my PhD that I never really wanted to be only a Victorianist. I had other things I was interested in too. So I went to modernist conferences. So I went to film conferences. So put yourself out there. Put yourself out there. Don't be nervous about going beyond your comfort zone and thinking more broadly about who you are as a researcher, because you're not one thing, and you're certainly not one thing for your whole career. Your research will evolve and continue to evolve, and that's a good thing. So go with your energy always. The next point that I have as I reach the end is also to do with research alongside postgraduate study and early career study. And what I'd suggest is to teach broadly in a way that will support your research. I won't say any more about that because there may be questions about that, but don't overburden yourself if you can help it with teaching, so that you don't have time for your research, you don't have time to get involved in research. But think strategically about the range of activities that you're involved in. I was thinking about interdisciplinarity. Was director of research before I became head of my department, and one of the things that we were often thinking about and talking about was how interdisciplinarity is one of the future interests of the government and of funding in this country. So thinking about interdisciplinary links, linking with people who aren't in your discipline. For me, my discipline is English. So thinking about talking to people who are interested in the same kind of concerns, but from a different disciplinary perspective, is something that can really give your research and your conceptualization of research problems an interesting spin, a different perspective. So reach out to those people. Keep an eye on what's going on in different departments in your university and what's going on in research groups that aren't in your home discipline, in order to try to enliven, to energize your own work. Because seeing research or your research area from someone else's perspective is always enlivening. It goes back to that thing I mentioned before about being open to new ideas. Research should never be about closing down ideas, of course. It's never just about developing one's own ideas, but it's about being open to new perspectives, open to rethinking one's own ideas in order to always improve and evolve in the future. Now, I think I've covered the last thing, which is that you should be empowered to organize things. And this begins right at the beginning. This is about starting a positive research culture at home, in your home institution. Start a reading group, start a discussion group, start a pub group. Be part of the research culture that you want to see. And if you don't see it around you already, be part of the change. I'm going to finish just by saying that underpinning all of this and everything that I've said, and I hope you'll remember this, is that when you get beyond your PhD, when you get into being an early career researcher and beyond that, in my experience and in my view, being a successful academic and defining a successful academic career isn't only about your academic brilliance. It's about that too, and I've no doubt that you're all absolutely brilliant, more brilliant than me, but it is also about being part of a positive and good research culture, and being a kind and open-minded and thoughtful and well-organized and strategizing researcher. When I've been on appointment committees, we don't always appoint the best person on paper. In fact, we often don't. We look for candidates who show evidence of research innovation. We're looking for people who will become part of a research community and people who will develop our research community in really exciting ways that we haven't done so far, things that we are not doing and we should be. So, of course, you need to have a strong academic background, your PhD, evidence of research excellence in your publications, but building an academic career is very much about building a good research culture and being part of a research culture. So be that person, be the person who can make a positive research culture, the person who doesn't just want to be first or be the winner, but who wants to help out and give a hand to other people too. People will notice that and people will offer you the same back in kind. And that's the kind of research community I think we all want to be a part of. Thanks very much for your attention, everyone. I'm going to stop sharing the screen now. Hi, everyone.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you. It was a brilliant talk. Thank you. It feels a little bit strange, right, that you finished talking and nobody's like clapping. So I was like
exactly that. Hello, everyone. I couldn't see any of you. I'm sorry if I seemed a bit weirded out a couple of times. It was like, because I'm not a very technical person. I was thinking, it's still going, right? It's still going.
Brilliant. So thank you. It was a really lovely talk. So we have some questions here. I will read them out loud so you can answer them.
Yeah.
So it says, a great advice to try and talk to people, but what about when we are too shy or anxious to talk to strangers? Will there be a good way to make ourselves conspicuous and stand out?
It's a really great question. I very much sympathise. Now, I'm a very shy person by nature. In fact, I used to hide behind my mum when until I was 12, I think, because I didn't want to speak to strangers. I have two pieces of advice. First would be, if you feel you maybe could tackle the anxiousness. One thing that a game I used to play with myself would be to almost to convince myself that I was playing the part of the person who is not nervous and doesn't get nervous. So I would be myself, but more confident, and that I would play this role for the time when I was asking the question. I think that if you can think of techniques to tackle it, it will help you. And in a way, asking questions in a small forum first and then building up to bigger events can help you with that, because the cool thing is that it's almost always okay. In fact, it's always okay. But if you don't feel able to tackle the shyness and anxiousness, what I would do would be to listen to the paper, listen to the speaker, and then go either after the conference or just after the paper, go to a quiet place and write your question and email the person who was speaking, such as, dear Professor so-and-so, I very much enjoyed your paper, and I wasn't able to ask you the question I wanted, but here's the question. And that way, that the speaker knows your name, they know you're interested. What's more, they know that you're not just trying to show off, because a lot of people ask showy-offy questions. Don't ask a showy-offy question. Everyone knows it. Everyone knows it's coming. So they know, but they will know that you took the time to write to them, and there is no one who is not touched by that. No one. It doesn't matter how big and important they are. They will feel kindly towards you, and they will know your name, and they will know that you know your stuff, and they will be interested in your question.
Great, good advice. We have another question. How do you deal with negativity from others in conferences? Like what you were saying, what you said were said during your PhD. Did you talk to anyone about it?
This is a good question. No, I didn't. The experience that I had during my PhD. Now, I told you that partly because I didn't speak to anyone about it, and I actually thought, and I did kind of think. I did think, I was ready to die on the spot. I was ready to die. I could see my whole life flashing before me. I just because I admired this person. And the way that I dealt with negativity then was not the right way, which was probably I just went really, really quiet. I can't remember, but I'm sure I went really, really quiet, or I was defensive and borderline aggressive. I can't remember, but I felt bad. What I would do, but that would not be the advice that I'd offer to you. And what I'd suggest is that you actually think through how you would handle negativity before you go to a conference, before you put yourself out there. Now, it's unlikely that it'll happen, but if it does, I think it's always better to be prepared and to think through, okay, if X were to happen, I will do Y. Because if someone says, if I didn't think it through myself, if someone said to me, your research is rubbish, my response would be probably quite robust and aggressive and not really very appropriate, even though they deserved it. So I wouldn't suggest that. If I thought it through though, and I thought through, okay, if someone says your research is rubbish, what do I say? What my response would be rather to sort of engage with that, which is quite difficult to do, but to say, okay, that's an interesting response. I wonder what made you say that, or I wonder on what basis are you saying that? Quite often people's hostility and negativity, as I think I said before, I think it would be, I think quite often people's negativity is because they are insecure themselves. I know that's quite a generous interpretation. Some people just aren't very nice, but if we believe for a minute, because it's more helpful and it's more positive for us to believe this, that they're quite aggressive because or negative because they're insecure themselves. I think it enables us, it empowers us to deal with it in a more positive way. And of course, it's also possible for you to leave or make allies of the other people in the group who are talking by sort of shooting someone a glance or and kind of turning the conversation. But I think dealing with it by not rising in the sense of rising to the challenge in a negative way leaves you, well, it disempowers the person who is being negative towards you. And I tell you what, if that person is being negative toward you, you will not be the first person that person has been negative toward, and they will have a reputation and it will precede them and you will find out about it. And then there will be a point at which you'll be able to swap stories with other people about how you were dissed by this person, because that will happen.
Cool. So we have a couple of more questions that I will merge them into one because we have not much time. So the first question is, how can we shift the power imbalances in academia? Mm-hmm. And the second one, it says, hi Kate, thank you for your talk. I really like the idea of being an academic entrepreneur. Is this somehow related to self-empowering? Yeah. So really good questions there.
Yeah, really good questions. Yes, absolutely. I think that in a way you can become the change that you want to be. No one is going to come up to you and say, especially when you're a starting out academic, it's unlikely that someone's going to come up to you and say, hey, organize this conference or do this, do that. No, there's not going to be a roadmap for your career. You draw up the roadmap. That's an incredibly empowering thing to do. Once you know that you can do it, if you have faith in yourself and you've come this far, you can do this. You have ideas. If you have the energy to make them happen, and I'm sure you do, you can people will be grateful to you, and people will be really happy that you're doing this stuff that allows them to be part of an invigorated research community. Definitely think about ways that will be helpful, to be great for the research community, but which will also invigorate you and invigorate your research. The seminar series I organised that I mentioned that's this autumn, I mean, sort of in August, I was thinking, God, why am I doing this? I've got so much else stuff to do. I've got so much to do. But actually, it's given such a great research focus. And sometimes doing something which is good for your career is also something that's good for the community, the research community. It also gets your name internationally known, and it motivates you for your own career, because you're thinking, wow, this really cool thing is happening. I managed to make that happen. That's a great thing. The more things you do, it's organizing it might start with organizing a reading group at your home institution, or why stop there? I mean, now that we're doing things on Zoom, you could organize a reading group for everyone in your field in the UK or even internationally. The sky's the limit. It really is. If you can think of it, you can usually make it happen. Don't be shy about asking for support from established academics in the field, your supervisor, your head of department. Write to them, set things out really carefully, know that you've done your homework and that you know exactly how things work. And I'm sure that they will support you in what you want to do.
Thank you. Excellent. Thank you. Okay. And finally, Emma Francis from the Doctoral College. She just wants to say that a great talk. Thank you, Kate. Lots of wonderful tips. And then she's for the audience. I put it in the chat, and I think you can see it in the Q&A, that she is asking for anyone who wants to be involved in organizing a conference for the Doctoral College Conference in 2021, you can go there. And this is a great way of putting at work all the tips that Kate has been talking about. So it's been a pleasure, and we run out of time now, but thank you again. And everyone, we hope to see you tomorrow. We have the first day of our engagement day with Professor Jim Al-Khalili. He's going to talk, we have here the program, so he's going to give a talk entitled Spreading the Word, Why Science Communication is So Vital. So I really recommend to be here for the morning session with Professor Al-Khalili. And in the afternoon, we have Professor Mirjana Povic. She's going to talk about science for development in Africa. Mirjana Povic is the first female academic in Ethiopia, and she is the director of the Space Center there, and not only she's the first female, but she's also the first white person to be working with an entirely native community there, and so she will have a very interesting perspective of the science development in Africa in particular, probably in Ethiopia. Thank you again, and see you tomorrow.
Thank you. Thanks, Noelia.